It was supposed to be a weekend of training with his team. The upcoming season was critical, and every day on the slopes mattered. But the weather had other plans. By mid-afternoon, a blizzard warning had been issued, forcing the resort to shut down all activities for the next 2 days. Blake saw it as an opportunity. He hadn't told Mia he was coming home early. He wanted to surprise her. Maybe they could spend the evening together, watch a movie, or even go out to dinner. As his car crunched into the driveway of their secluded home on the edge of town, Blake noticed that all the lights were off except for the dim glow coming from the upstairs window. Odd, he thought. It was only 7 p.m., and Mia usually had the house lit up like a Christmas tree. Blake entered through the back door, careful not to make too much noise. He wanted to see the look on Mia's face when she realized he was home early. But as he stepped into the quiet house, something felt off. Blake climbed the stairs, his boots barely making a sound on the polished wood. As he approached the bedroom, muffled laughter reached his ears, followed by a low, unfamiliar male voice. His heart began to race. When he reached the door, it was slightly ajar. Through the gap, he could see Mia on the bed, her face flushed, laughing as she leaned into a man who was very much not Blake. They were both completely unclothed, tangled in the sheets, oblivious to the world outside their little bubble of infidelity. Blake's stomach dropped. His chest tightened. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he thought he might be sick. He didn't burst in, though every instinct screamed at him to do so. Instead, he fumbled for his phone, his hands trembling as he opened the camera. He pressed record and held the phone steady, capturing the evidence he needed. He couldn't confront them now, not like this. He wasn't even sure he could trust himself to speak. When he had enough footage, Blake turned and left the house as quietly as he had entered. Blake didn't know where to go or what to do. His emotions were a whirlwind of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. He drove aimlessly for nearly an hour before pulling into the driveway of his best friend, Ryan. Ryan opened the door to find Blake standing there, his face pale and his eyes red-rimmed. "Blake? What's going on? Can I crash here tonight?" Blake asked, his voice hoarse. "Of course," Ryan said immediately, stepping aside to let him in. "What happened?" Blake sat on the couch, staring at the floor. After a long pause, he said, "Mia's cheating on me." Ryan's eyes widened. "What? Are you sure?" Blake pulled out his phone and showed Ryan the video. Ryan's face darkened as he watched it. "Jesus, Blake. I'm so sorry." Blake nodded numbly. "I don't know what to do, Ryan. I can't even think straight right now." Ryan placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight. Stay here, get some rest. We'll deal with this in the morning." Blake lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The images of Mia and the stranger replayed in his mind like a broken record. He had trusted her completely, shared his life with her, and now it felt like everything had been a lie. But amid the heartbreak, a spark of determination began to grow. He wasn't going to let this destroy him. If Mia thought she could betray him and walk away unscathed, she was wrong. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. Blake woke early the next morning, though he hadn't slept much. He sat at Ryan's kitchen table, staring into a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Ryan joined him, a look of concern on his face. "How are you holding up?" Ryan asked. Blake shrugged. "Still feels like a bad dream." Ryan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "So, what's the plan? You can't just sit on this." Blake nodded slowly. "No, I can't. But I'm not going to confront her yet. Not until I know what I'm dealing with." "What do you mean?" "I need to know how long this has been going on, who the guy is, how deep this betrayal runs." Ryan frowned. "How are you going to find all that out?" Blake pulled out his phone, his jaw tightening. "I recorded what I saw last night. That's enough to get the ball rolling. I'll start with that." Blake spent the next few days gathering every piece of information he could. He scoured Mia's social media accounts, looking for any signs of suspicious activity. He checked their shared bank accounts, scanning for unusual expenses, hotel bookings, restaurant bills, anything that might suggest she had been hiding something. And then there was her phone. One evening, when Mia was in the shower, Blake slipped into the bedroom and found her phone on the nightstand. He unlocked it using the password he knew by heart and quickly navigated to her messages. What he found made his blood boil. The stranger's name was Nate, and their messages left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. They weren't just flirting. They had been meeting regularly, exchanging photos, and making plans to see each other again. One message, in particular, stood out. Nate, last night was incredible. Can't wait for round 2. Let me know when your husband's out of the house again. Blake clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a full-blown affair. Blake didn't confront Mia about what he had found, but he began observing her more closely. He noticed the little things he had overlooked before. The way she always kept her phone close, the late nights she explained away as girls' nights, the sudden increase in her wardrobe spending. Every detail confirmed what he already knew. The woman he had loved and trusted was living a double life. Knowing he needed to protect himself, Blake reached out to a divorce attorney. He explained the situation, showing the lawyer the video and messages he had collected. "You've got solid evidence," the attorney said, nodding. "This will put you in a strong position if it goes to court." Blake took a deep breath. "I don't want her to walk away from this unscathed. She betrayed me, and she should face the consequences." "She will," the attorney assured him. "But be patient. We need to build a case before making any moves." Blake decided he needed to confront the other man involved in his wife's betrayal. Through the messages he had found, he learned that Nate worked at a nearby gym. One afternoon, Blake walked into the gym and spotted Nate almost immediately, a tall, muscular man with an air of arrogance about him. Blake waited until Nate finished his shift, following him to the parking lot. "Hey, Nate," Blake called out. Nate turned, his expression shifting from confusion to unease as he recognized Blake. Do I know you?" "You know my wife," Blake said coldly. Nate's face flushed. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble." "Oh, you're in trouble," Blake interrupted, stepping closer. "You think you can sleep with another man's wife and get away with it?" Nate raised his hands defensively. "It's not what you think." "Don't lie to me," Blake snapped. "I've seen the messages. I know everything." For a moment, Nate said nothing, his confidence faltering. Then he shrugged. "Look, I didn't force her to do anything. If you've got a problem, take it up with her." Blake's jaw tightened. "Trust me, I will. But you don't get to walk away from this scot-free." Nate smirked. "What are you going to do about it?" Blake didn't answer. He turned and walked away, his mind racing with thoughts of how to make both Nate and Mia face the consequences of their actions. Blake knew the time was coming when he would have to confront Mia directly, but he wasn't ready to do so without ensuring that every piece of his life was in order. He continued working with his attorney, documenting everything, and preparing for what would inevitably be a messy, painful divorce. But more than that, he was preparing himself emotionally. He had spent years building a life with Mia, and letting go of that life, even after what she had done, wasn't easy. Still, Blake knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't let her betrayal define him. Blake returned home late one evening, unannounced. The house was dark except for a small lamp in the living room, where Mia was sitting with a glass of wine in hand. She looked up, startled, when he walked in. "Blake," she said, setting down her glass. "I didn't know you were coming home tonight." "Yeah, I figured you didn't," Blake replied, his voice devoid of emotion. There was an edge to his tone that made Mia pause. "Is everything okay?" she asked cautiously. Blake dropped his bag by the door and walked to the center of the room, facing her. "No, Mia, everything is not okay." Her expression shifted, a flicker of panic crossing her face. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Blake said, pulling out his phone, "that I know about Nate. I know about the affair. I know everything." Mia froze, her eyes widening. "Blake, I can explain." "No," Blake interrupted, holding up a hand. "You don't get to explain. I've been watching you. I've seen the messages. The photos. I saw you that night, Mia. I saw you with him in our bed." Her mouth opened and closed, as if she were searching for the right words, but nothing came out. Blake threw his phone onto the coffee table, where it landed with a loud thud. "You've been lying to me for months, haven't you? While I was out there working, training, building a future for us. You were here with him. Tears welled up in Mia's eyes. Blake, please, it wasn't like that. I didn't mean for it to happen. Didn't mean for it to happen? Blake scoffed. You invited him into our home, into our bed. That's not an accident, Mia. That's a choice. Mia buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I was lonely, Blake. You're always gone, always putting your career first. I felt like I didn't matter anymore. Blake's laugh was bitter and hollow. So your solution was to cheat? To destroy everything we've built together? I didn't want to hurt you, she whispered. Don't lie to me, Blake said sharply. You didn't care about me. If you did, you wouldn't have done it in the first place. Mia wiped her tears, her voice trembling. I made a mistake, Blake. I know I screwed up, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through it. No, Blake said firmly, cutting her off. There's no fixing this. You didn't just betray me. You destroyed everything. And now you're going to face the consequences. Blake spent the night at home, but he couldn't bear to stay in the same room as Mia. He slept in the guest bedroom, though slept was a generous term for the restless hours he spent staring at the ceiling. The next morning, he handed Mia a stack of papers, the divorce filing. Mia's hands shook as she flipped through the documents. You're really doing this? You didn't leave me much of a choice, Blake said coldly. Blake, please, she pleaded. We've been together for 10 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It did, Blake said, until you threw it away. News of the affair spread quickly through their small, tight-knit community. It wasn't long before friends and neighbors began whispering about Mia's betrayal. Blake, once a beloved figure in town thanks to his skiing career, received an outpouring of support from people who were shocked and appalled by what had happened. Mia, on the other hand, became a pariah. Friends stopped calling. Invitations to social events disappeared. Even casual acquaintances avoided her in public, their polite smiles replaced with judgmental stares. Blake didn't stop at confronting Mia. He made sure Nate faced consequences as well. Using the messages and evidence he had gathered, Blake reached out to Nate's employer, a local gym that prided itself on professionalism and community values. The gym's management was less than impressed with Nate's behavior. Within a week, he was fired, his reputation in tatters. Blake didn't stop there. He shared his story with friends and colleagues, ensuring that Nate's actions wouldn't be forgotten anytime soon. The weeks following the confrontation marked the beginning of an unraveling for both Blake and Mia. Though Blake had initiated the divorce, the pain of betrayal remained an open wound, gnawing at him in quiet moments. Mia, on the other hand, found herself spiraling into an abyss of regret and isolation. Blake's days were consumed with grueling training sessions. The slopes, once his playground, had become an outlet for his anger and frustration. Each run down the mountain was a release, a way to channel his emotions into something physical and tangible. How could she have done this? Blake tried to find solace in therapy. His therapist encouraged him to focus on rebuilding his identity outside of his marriage. You're more than this betrayal, she told him. You've lost something important, but you're still standing. That's where your strength lies. Blake nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed her yet. Mia's world grew smaller and darker with each passing day. The community had turned its back on her, and she could feel the weight of their judgment everywhere she went. The whispers, the side glances, the avoidance. It was as though she had been branded. Even her closest friends had distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with her. Mia tried to apologize, to reach out to those she had once been close to, but the responses were always the same: cold, curt, or non-existent. Nate, too, was feeling the sting of his actions. Word of his affair with Mia had spread beyond Blake's circle, tarnishing his reputation even further. The gym that had fired him was one of the most popular in town, and its members were more than happy to share gossip about his downfall. Without a job and with few prospects, Nate moved to a neighboring town, hoping to escape the shadow of his actions. But starting over wasn't as easy as he'd hoped. His confidence, once his greatest asset, was shaken. The women he had once pursued now saw him for what he was: a man who thrived on destroying what others had built. For the first time in his life, Nate felt small. The day of the divorce hearing was somber and uneventful. Blake and Mia sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, barely glancing at each other. Mia's lawyer tried to argue for alimony, citing her lack of income and the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to during their marriage. But Blake's lawyer was prepared, presenting the evidence of her infidelity. The judge ruled in Blake's favor, granting him the house and absolving him of any financial obligation to Mia. When the hearing was over, Mia tried to approach Blake as he left the courtroom. "Blake," she said softly, her eyes filled with tears. "Can we talk? Just for a minute?" Blake stopped but didn't turn to face her. "There's nothing left to say, Mia." "Please," she whispered. I need you to know how sorry I am." Blake closed his eyes, his voice steady but cold. "You already told me. But sorry doesn't fix what you did." He walked away, leaving her standing alone in the hallway. Mia, meanwhile, struggled to find her footing. With no financial support from Blake and limited job prospects, she was forced to move into a small, shabby apartment. The space was cramped and cold, a far cry from the home she had once shared with Blake. She spent most nights alone, replaying her mistakes and wondering if she would ever find redemption. Even Nate was no longer in her life. Their relationship had fizzled out quickly after Blake confronted him, leaving Mia with nothing but regret and shame. She tried reaching out to her family, but their sympathy had its limits. Her mother, once her greatest confidant, had grown tired of Mia's tears and apologies. "You made your choices," her mother said one evening. "Now you have to live with them." Blake and Mia had once shared a life filled with love, trust, and dreams of the future. But now, that life was a distant memory, replaced by one filled with pain and regret. Though Blake was beginning to find hope again, the scars of Mia's betrayal would never fully fade. And for Mia, the weight of her actions was a burden she would carry for the rest of her life. The fallout from Mia's betrayal was no longer confined to her personal life. It seeped into every corner of her existence. Every day felt heavier than the last, and the reminders of what she had lost were everywhere. Blake had moved on, and she was left to confront the wreckage alone. Mia's once vibrant social circle had dwindled to nothing. Friends who had once gathered for dinner parties at her house now avoided her calls. Former acquaintances, who used to greet her with warmth and smiles, now turned away or offered only curt, polite nods. She tried going out one evening to a local cafe, hoping to reconnect with a former coworker she had run into online. But after an awkward hour of strained conversation, it was clear that the judgment lingered. "You know," the coworker finally said, stirring her coffee, "I just don't understand why you do it. Blake was such a great guy." The words cut deep, and Mia couldn't offer more than a mumbled apology before excusing herself and walking home, tears stinging her eyes. Mia, on the other hand, was sinking further into despair. Her financial situation had worsened. She was behind on rent, and her credit card debt was piling up. The job she had managed to keep barely covered her basic expenses. One night, in a moment of desperation, Mia decided to write Blake another letter. She had sent one before, but this time, she poured everything into it. "Blake, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I hurt you in ways I can never undo. But I need you to understand that I've never stopped loving you. I was selfish and weak, and I destroyed the best thing in my life. You. Every day, I wake up wishing I could go back and change what I did. But I can't. All I can do is tell you how sorry I am and hope that, one day, you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Even if I never hear from you again, I need you to know this. You didn't deserve what I did to you. You deserved so much better. I'm sorry, Blake, for everything." Mia mailed the letter the next morning, her hands shaking as she dropped it into the mailbox. Blake received the letter a few days later. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at the envelope for a long time before finally opening it. The words hit him like a wave. He could feel Mia's regret and pain in every sentence, but he also felt a pang of anger. Her apology didn't change what she had done. It didn't erase the betrayal or the months of agony he had endured because of her choices. Blake folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. He wasn't ready to respond, and he wasn't sure he ever would be. Nate, too, had reached rock bottom. His move to a new town had done little to improve his situation. Without steady work, He was living paycheck to paycheck, taking odd jobs wherever he could find them. The confidence and charm that had once defined him were gone, replaced by bitterness and self-pity. He spent his nights drinking alone, replaying his decisions and wondering where it had all gone wrong. One evening, as he sat in a dingy bar nursing a beer, he overheard two patrons talking about a recent skiing competition. "Blake Harrington is back," one of them said. "Guy's unstoppable. After what happened with his wife, I'm amazed he's doing so well." Nate winced at the mention of Blake's name. It was a reminder of the part he had played in destroying someone else's life, and the fact that he had nothing to show for it. Blake continued to find success on the slopes. His name was becoming synonymous with resilience, and reporters often asked him how he had managed to come back so strong after such a tumultuous year. "I focused on what I could control," he would say, keeping the details of his personal life vague. "And I surrounded myself with people who believed in me." But even as he moved forward, there were moments when the past crept in. Seeing couples at events or hearing love songs on the radio reminded him of what he had lost and what had been taken from him. Like the video in support of Blade, Mia's situation reached its nadir when she was served an eviction notice. With nowhere else to go, she moved into a women's shelter, her pride shattered. She spent her nights lying on a cot, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Blake. She wondered if he was happy, if he had moved on, if he ever thought of her. Blake and Mia's paths had diverged, but their lives bore the scars of the choices they had made. Blake was rebuilding, but the wounds of betrayal still lingered, making it difficult for him to trust or open himself up to others fully. Mia, on the other hand, had lost everything: her husband, her home, her reputation, and her sense of self. The weight of her actions was a burden she carried daily, a constant reminder of what she had thrown away. For both of them, the life they had once shared was gone, leaving behind only echoes of what could have been. Months passed, but the wounds left behind by Mia's betrayal and Blake's heartbreak never fully healed. Their lives, once intertwined, had splintered beyond repair. The choices they had made, Blake's in response to Mia's actions and Mia's in a moment of selfishness, left permanent scars that defined their futures. Blake continued to excel in his skiing career. His victory at the regional championship led to new sponsorships, media attention, and opportunities to compete on a global stage. The acclaim should have been a source of joy, but it was bittersweet. For every success he achieved, there was a small, nagging emptiness within him. The betrayal had taught him hard lessons about trust and vulnerability, but it also left him closed off from forming deep connections. Blake occasionally dated, but each relationship fizzled out before it could become serious. He found himself holding others at a distance, unable to let his guard down completely. The memories of Mia's infidelity were always there, lurking in the back of his mind, reminding him of how fragile trust could be. His closest relationships were with his friends, especially Ryan, who had been his rock through everything. Together, they spent weekends hiking, skiing, and enjoying the quiet simplicity of their mountain town. Blake wasn't unhappy, but he wasn't truly at peace either. He was surviving, moving forward, but always with a shadow behind him. Mia's life, meanwhile, continued its downward spiral. Living in a shelter had forced her to confront the full weight of her choices. She spent her days searching for work and her nights lying awake, consumed by memories of Blake and the life they had shared. Her attempts to rebuild were met with constant obstacles. Prospective employers were hesitant to hire her when asked about the gaps in her resume. Old friends refused to answer her calls, unwilling to risk their reputations by associating with her. Mia's financial situation was dire, but the emotional toll was even worse. Every day felt like a punishment, a reminder of the life she had destroyed. One evening, she found herself staring at an old photo of her and Blake on their honeymoon. They were on a beach, laughing as the sun set behind them. Tears streamed down her face as she traced the edges of his smile. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though there was no one to hear her. Thank you for listening to the story to the end. Please like, share your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel.